Welcome back to the Keiser Report. A lot of people are scratching their head. What do we do? These banks, what's going on? Should we appoint a special commission? Is there anyone who knows what's going on? Well, fortunately, there is somebody in America that does know what's going on, who's faced the problems before, and who has solved the problems before. Welcome to the show. Let's go to Missouri to talk with Professor William K. Black. Professor Black, welcome to the Keiser Report.
Thank you. It's good to be back.
All righty. Now, just to remind people, of course, you were a bank regulator back in the 1980s when I was working on Wall Street, and you cleaned up the S&L crisis, and you put 1,000 bankers away in jail, at least. I may have the number wrong. First, Professor Black, whatever happened to Sarbanes-Oxley? Why are we discussing how much bonuses these bankers should be getting instead of discussing how much time in jail they should be serving?
Sarbanes-Oxley had next to nothing to do with creating successful criminal prosecutions. It got focused on procedure, and ironically, it made a fortune for the Big Four audit firms that were the heart of the problem.
Talk about the racketeering here, because you've got the accounting agencies, the rating agencies, the investment banks, the hedge funds. They're all operating as a racket. Isn't that correct?
All of them have been deliberately subjected to what we in economics call a Gresham's dynamic. In a Gresham's dynamic, the least ethical gain a competitive advantage. And when that happens, marketplaces become perverse, and they drive the ethical out of the marketplace, and the people that triumph are the absolute worst folks. Now, this is deliberately engineered. For example, WAMU, it has come out, had a blacklist of appraisers, except you got on the blacklist of appraisers if you were honest.
Right. So the least ethically inclined have an advantage in this new economy. Now, if you look at what happened, let's say Argentina, circa 2000, 2001, there was wholesale looting by the elites. They stole the money and they ran away. When I hear about these Christmas bonuses on Wall Street, it seems to me that basically it's wholesale looting. It's not reform. It's not stimulus. It's not anything other than looting. Would you argue with that conclusion?
Well, to tie your questions together, Sarbanes-Oxley didn't work because it didn't deal with the fundamental perverse incentives. And the fundamental perverse incentives are the ones we've just been discussing. One is executive compensation, but the other is professional compensation. And that's what allows the CEO crooks in the financial industry to suborn all of these entities that are supposed to be independent, that are supposed to be controls, and turn them into the most valuable allies of the underlying accounting fraud, which is designed to maximize CEO and CFO bonuses. And this is why I say American business schools all too often have become fraud factories.
Okay, well, what you're describing there can also be used to describe how a mafia family works. They co-opt other people in the society to do their bidding for them, and you have a mafia-style hierarchy. But during the 1980s, of course, Rudy Giuliani went after Drexel using RICO, anti-racketeering laws, if I remember correctly. Now, why can't they bring that back? This is obviously racketeering. Why are they pussyfooting, and why don't they go after the racket as a whole?
The fundamental reason is that the FBI and the Justice Department can only be successful if the regulators serve as the Sherpas. And I mean that in the following two senses. That we as the regulators have to be the guide, but we also have to do the heavy lifting. Because we're the only ones that have the resources and the expertise in the industry to be able to make an FBI investigation successful. The Huffington Post had a superb story on this that actually I helped generate, and that they finally got the regulators to answer the question, how many criminal referrals have you done this decade? And the Office of the Comptroller of the Currency, which is supposed to regulate national banks, and the Office of Thrift Supervision, which was supposed to regulate savings and loans, the answer was 0. We made well over 1,000 criminal referrals. If you don't investigate, you don't find.
Okay, William K. Black, during the S&L crisis of the 80s, how big was your staff?
My staff was 50 attorneys.
Okay, how big is the staff right now going after the problem?
The Justice Department has roughly 1/5 the staff that the Justice Department used against the savings and loan crisis, and this crisis is somewhere on the order of 40 times larger than the savings and loan crisis.
Okay, that 40 times larger. Now, the savings and loan crisis, in nominal terms or inflation-adjusted terms, it was something on the order of $600 billion?
Now, it's less than that. I can give you the figure in 1993 dollars. It was roughly $150 billion.
So you're talking about a 40 times bigger. Help me with the math here. So you're saying that we're talking about an amount of...
We're talking about losses in the 6 to 10 to 15 trillion range, depending on who you believe.
Okay, now you say 6 to 10 to 15 trillion. That's interesting because in an economy like the one in America, Walmart can tell you who's buying a razor on a Thursday at 2:30 in the afternoon with an RFID tracking system and advanced supply chain management and all kinds of interesting technological innovations. But apparently, we don't know whether we're losing 6, 10, or 15 trillion dollars out of the back door of the banking system. Don't you see a bit of a disconnect there?
Yes, exactly. That's what we've been emphasizing, the death of regulation. So what happened in this crisis compared to the savings and loan crisis is there's a cover-up in this crisis. And if you are deliberately change the accounting rules, which was done, and if the regulators deliberately don't look hard, run these sham stress tests, then you don't find remotely the true extent of the losses. And if you don't investigate, you don't find the losses and you don't find the fraud. Therefore, the quality of information that we have in this crisis is vastly worse. Now, remember, we had over 1,000 successful felony prosecutions. We had several thousand successful enforcement actions, and we had roughly 1,000 successful civil actions. Think how many facts come out in the course of all of those investigations that give you an incredibly accurate picture of what happened. None of that has happened. Name a really large civil suit by the government against any of the parties that specialized in the non-prime lending. Name a huge enforcement action that actually went to some kind of hearing and information was made public. It hasn't happened.
Let me ask you something. You're saying $10 trillion, to use a round number, in losses. The Federal Reserve and Barack Obama have thrown quantitative easing and stimulus packages at these losses to try to get the economy starting again, but the economy is rolling over and playing dead again, which is to infer that there are more losses yet to be disclosed. Now, William K. Black, I know that's a bit of a guessing game because no one's providing accurate information, but what is yet to be revealed in this debt vortex? Is it another 10 trillion yet to be revealed in debt?
Well, there are two different things going on. First, there is a really severe recession, and that really severe recession has reduced private demand somewhere in the range of $6 trillion. The stimulus bill is, of course, roughly $800 billion. So you can see that it isn't remotely going to fill the hole in lost demand, and you actually have to net out of the stimulus bill a $200 billion reduction in state and local funding. Now, there's a second thing. How big are the losses? The IMF and the administration originally estimated the losses in the $2 to $2.5 trillion range, and we know that the recession and the loss in housing values turned out to be far worse than the initial estimates, right? And you can see what losses are being recognized by the banks, and it's nowhere near that, and we know why. Because the banks use their political pull to get Congress to extort the Financial Accounting Standards Board, FASB, to change the accounting rules so the banks don't have to recognize the losses unless and until they actually sell the assets. So what happened? While there has been a massive increase in delinquencies, there's an enormous lag in foreclosures. And even when there's foreclosures, there's an enormous lag in selling the assets. This is the Japanese strategy of covering up the losses, and it prevents markets from recovering. That's why Japan had the lost decade, which is really 2 lost decades.
So you're saying on the demand side, we know there's been a drop in demand, and on the missing the black hole of debt, we know it's been understated. We know that they haven't marked to market the value of this debt. It's still sitting there on the balance sheet, yet to be marked to market at some point. The theory in the Fed and the Treasury is to somehow paper over this problem, extend and pretend, and to get some Hail Mary pass, something is going to come along to do what you decided you needed to do in the S&L crisis. You ring-fenced all that debt. Here, they've done none of that ring-fencing. So all the crooks, they're still in place. How come no one has ring-fenced the crooks?
I know you think you're a pessimist, but you're actually an optimist. It's actually worse. The reason you gimmick the accounting rules is so that these guys can still pay their bonuses to themselves.
Right. So this was a big lesson from the savings and loan crisis, was not to act more ethically, but how do we change the law so that next time we do the same fraud, we won't get caught? Is that a fair assessment?
Yeah, worse than that again, because after the savings and loan crisis, we passed the Prompt Corrective Action Law, which mandates the closure of these insolvent banks. But it has what we told them as a huge Achilles heel. And that is, if you gimmick the accounting rules, you can gimmick the Prompt Corrective Action Law. And that's what's happened. That's the Japanese strategy of covering up. We sold bad assets promptly, and that allowed markets to recover and what we call clear. If you keep a huge overhang of inventory that everybody knows is out there, then markets don't recover.
All right, finally, one last question. What about the possibility of citizen arrests? Is this a viable possibility?
No. But citizens can demand that these folks act against the major frauds. They can demand that they clean up the accounting. That's just a complete obscenity to be able to gimmick the accounting so that you continue to pay yourself massive bonuses for destroying major financial institutions. Citizens can demand an end to the systemically dangerous institutions. These are the SDIs, roughly 20 of them. The Treasury says if a single one of them goes, they will cause a global crisis. We know there are absolutely no economies of scale at that size. In fact, it's quite the opposite. They're far less efficient because they're so gargantuan. We know that their political power causes immense problems, and we know that they are a ticking time bomb for the world economy. So the citizens can demand that those SDIs, the systemically dangerous institutions, be shrunk to the point that they no longer threaten a global crisis.
All right, that's all the time for we have this time. William K. Black, thanks so much for being on the Keiser Report.
Thank you.
All right, and that's going to do it for this edition of the Keiser Report. I want to thank my guests, Stacey Herbert and William K. Black down there in Kansas City, Missouri. And if you want to send me an email, please do so at Keiser Report at, what is it at? Oh, yeah, rttv.ru. Until next time, this is Max Keiser saying bye, y'all.